The wind in Cottonwood Valley did not merely blow, it scoured. It hunted for cracks in the siding of the buildings and weakness in the souls of the people who dared to live there. It carried the grit of 3 states, driving dust into the seams of clothing and the corners of eyes until the whole world felt like it was made of sandpaper. Clara Wren stepped down from the stagecoach into the teeth of that wind. Her boots hit the wooden platform of the depot with a hollow thud that seemed to echo her own emptiness. She was 23 years old, though the last month of travel had aged her spirit by a decade. She wore a traveling dress of dark blue serge that had once been respectable, but was now bruised with the dust of the road and mended at the hem where she had caught it on a crate in St. Louis. She stood alone. The driver threw her trunk down with a grunt, the heavy leather box landing with a thud that shook the boards. He did not offer to carry it to the shelter of the overhang. He simply climbed back up, shouted at his team, and the coach lurched away, leaving her in the silence of the high plains. The depot was little more than a shack with peeling paint, sitting on the edge of a town that looked like it was holding its breath against the sky. The sky was too big. That was Clara's first thought. It was a vast, pale dome of blue that offered no cover and no comfort. It made a person feel small. It made a person feel visible. The station agent, a man with a handlebar mustache and a vest tied across his stomach, stepped out of the office. He wiped his hands on a rag and squinted at her. "You are the Hale bride," he stated, not asking. "Jonah said the stage was due yesterday." Clara tightened her grip on her reticule. Inside was the letter, the contract, and the lie that was not quite a lie. "There was a delay at the river crossing," Clara said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced this steadiness for 1,000 miles. "The water was high." The man grunted. He looked at a clipboard hanging by the door. "Name on the manifest says Etta Wren. You do not look like an Etta." Clara felt the cold prickle of shame, familiar as an old shawl. "Etta is my cousin. She was unable to travel." The agent stopped wiping his hands. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on the plainness of her face, the sensible set of her jaw, the lack of ribbons or curls. Etta was golden. Etta was soft. Clara was the structure that held things up when the gold wore off. "So they sent you instead," the man said. It was a statement of fact, brutal and unadorned. "I am here to fulfill the contract," Clara said. "Is Mr. Hale here?" "He was here yesterday, sat on that bench for 4 hours. He's not a man who comes to town for nothing. He went back to the ranch, said he would check again today if the work allowed." Clara nodded. She dragged her trunk toward the wall of the station, out of the wind. "Then I will wait." The agent laughed, a dry sound like dry leaves skittering. "You might be waiting a long time. Miss Jonah Hale runs that place alone. If a fence is down or a calf is sick, a bride, even a replacement one, comes second." The word hung in the air. Replacement. Clara sat on the bench. She folded her gloved hands in her lap. She would wait. She had nowhere else to go. The life she had left behind in Ohio was a smoking ruin of debt and bad memories. Her stepfather had made it clear that one of them had to go to the Wyoming Territory to satisfy the arrangement he had made with the broker. Etta had wept and fainted, and finally vanished in the night with a Bible salesman, leaving Clara standing in the hallway with the ticket in her hand and the grim realization that she was the only currency left to pay the family debt. 2 hours passed. The sun began to dip, painting the clouds in bruised purples and bloody oranges. The town of Cottonwood stirred. Men moved between the saloon and the general store. Women in calico dresses hurried along the boardwalks, their heads down against the wind. Clara felt their eyes. They slowed as they passed the depot. They whispered. She saw a woman point, then cover her mouth. A man tipped his hat, but his smile was a smirk, sharp and knowing. She needed water. She walked to the boarding house across the street, her chin high. The common room smelled of stale beer and boiled cabbage. The landlady, a woman with a face like a dried apple named Mrs. Hatcher, looked up from her knitting. "I need a room for a few hours," Clara said, "until Mr. Hale arrives, And a glass of water. Mrs. Hatcher looked at Clara's dusty dress. $2, up front. $2 is robbery for a few hours, Clara said, though she kept her tone polite. For girls like you, who come and go, the rate is $2. Mrs. Hatcher said. She did not look up from her needles. We get mail-order girls through here every spring. Half of them are on the stage back east within the month. I cannot run a charity for flighty women. I am not flighty, Clara said. She placed $2 silver on the counter. They were nearly the last of her money. And I am not going back, Mrs. Hatcher swept the coins into her apron. That is what they all say. The quiet ones are the first to break. And Jonah Hale's place? That is a hard place. It eats soft things. Clara drank the tepid water and returned to the depot. She would not hide in a room. She would sit on the bench where he could see her. It was nearly dusk when the wagon appeared. It was a buckboard, weathered gray, pulled by 2 large draft horses that looked powerful but thin. The man driving did not hurry them. He let them pick their way through the ruts of the street with a plodding rhythm. He pulled the team to a halt in front of the depot. He did not jump down. He set the brake and wrapped the reins around the handle, then descended slowly, as if his joints were stiff. Jonah Hale was a tall man, but he carried his height like a burden. He wore a canvas coat that had been mended in 3 places with mismatched thread. His hat was pulled low, casting his face in shadow, but Clara could see the jawline, sharp and covered in a day's growth of dark stubble. He was covered in dust. It lay on his shoulders, in the creases of his coat, in the lines around his eyes. He walked up the steps. He stopped 3 feet from her. He did not take off his hat. You are the Wren girl, he said. His voice was low, a rumble that seemed to come from deep in his chest. It was not unkind, but it lacked any trace of welcome. Clara stood up. She smoothed her skirts. I am Clara Wren. Jonah looked at her. He looked at the empty space beside her. The papers said Etta. Etta is gone. Clara said. She did not offer excuses. She did not tell him about the Bible salesman or the tears. I am her cousin. I have the contract here. She held out the envelope. Jonah took it. His hands were large, the knuckles swollen and scarred, the skin rough as bark. He opened the envelope and took out the paper. He read it in the fading light. He read it twice. Clara watched his face. She expected anger. She expected him to throw the paper down and demand his money back from the broker. She expected the rejection that had dogged her since she was 12 years old and too tall, too serious, too plain. Jonah folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He looked at the horizon, where the sun was cutting itself on the edge of the mountains. He tightened his jaw, a muscle feathering in his cheek. All right, he said. Clara blinked. All right? I have a wagon, he said. Do you have a trunk? Yes, it is there. He walked past her. He lifted the heavy trunk as if it were filled with feathers and carried it to the wagon. He slid it into the bed. Then he turned and waited for her. It is a 2-hour ride, he said. It will be dark before we get there. He did not offer her a hand up. He simply waited until she had climbed onto the bench seat. Then he walked around and climbed up beside her. He clicked his tongue at the horses, and the wagon lurched forward. They did not speak. The town fell away behind them. The prejudice of the staring faces faded, replaced by the indifference of the land. The road wound out into the valley, following the line of a creek that was little more than a trickle of mud. Clara looked at the land. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. The grass was the color of old gold, shifting in the wind like the pelt of a sleeping animal. But as she looked closer, she saw the harshness. The creek beds were cracked open like dry lips. She saw the white curve of ribs showing through the hide of a steer standing near a dry water tank. She saw buzzards turning slow, lazy circles in the high air, waiting. It is dry, she said, breaking the silence. It has not rained since May, Jonah said. He kept his eyes on the ears of the horses. Does the well hold? Barely, he said. They rode in silence for another mile. Clara looked at him from the corner of her eye. He had a scar running from his temple into his hairline, a jagged white line that spoke of violence. He did not look at her. He seemed to have forgotten she was there, or perhaps he was simply used to being alone. "I can work," Clara said suddenly. The words felt important. "I know I am not Etta. I know the contract promised you something else, but I can work, I can cook, and I can sew, and I grew up on a farm before my stepfather moved us to town." Jonah turned his head. His eyes were dark, the color of wet slate. "I did not ask for a worker. Miss Wren, I have hired hands for work." "Then what did you ask for?" He looked away, back to the road. "I asked for a wife, because the law says a man cannot hold certain claims without a family, and because this house is quiet." "I can be quiet," Clara said. "I suspect you can," he said. They arrived at the ranch in full dark. The house was a shadow against the stars, a single-story structure of timber and stone. A barn loomed nearby, smelling of hay and horses. Jonah unhitched the team by lantern light. Clara held the lantern for him. She watched his hands move. Efficient, sure, wasting no motion. When the horses were stalled, he led her to the house. Inside, it was clean but stark. There were no curtains on the windows, only shutters. The furniture was heavy oak, built for use, not comfort. A cold fireplace dominated the main room. "Your room is here," Jonah said, pointing to a door off the kitchen. "I sleep in the back." Clara opened the door. It was a small room, likely intended for a child or a storage pantry. There was a narrow iron bed with a quilt, a washstand with a pitcher, and a single hook on the wall. "Thank you," she said. "There is stew on the stove." Jonah said, "I ate before I left. Help yourself." He turned and walked into the darkness of the main room. Clara heard the heavy door of his bedroom close. The latch clicked. She ate the cold stew standing up in the kitchen. It was thick with beef and potatoes, seasoned only with salt. It tasted like survival. Later, lying in the narrow bed, Clara listened to the wind rattling the shutters. She heard the yip and howl of coyotes in the distance, a lonely, shivering sound. She heard the house creak as it cooled. She pulled the quilt up to her chin. For the first time in months, she was not moving. She was not running from a debt collector or a stepfather's anger. She was in a stranger's house, married by proxy to a man who had barely looked at her, in a land that looked ready to kill anything that wasn't strong enough. But as she listened to the coyotes, she realized something strange. The door was locked. The walls were thick. The man in the other room had carried her trunk and fed her horses before he fed himself. She was an intruder. Yes, but for the first time in years, she was safe. The next morning began before the sun. Clara woke to the sound of a rooster. She dressed quickly in her work dress, a faded gray cotton, and braided her hair tight against her head. She went to the kitchen. The fire was dead. She riddled the grate, added kindling, and got a fire roaring. She found coffee beans and a grinder. By the time Jonah walked into the kitchen, the room was warm and smelled of coffee and frying bacon. Jonah stopped in the doorway. He looked at the table set for two. He looked at Clara, who was sweeping the floor near the hearth. He looked as if he had walked into the wrong house. "Good morning," Clara said. "Morning," he muttered. He went to the basin and splashed water on his face. He sat at the table. Clara brought the coffee pot over. As she reached across to pour into his cup, her sleeve brushed his shoulder. Jonah flinched. It was a sharp, violent jerk, his whole body recoiling as if she had burned him. Coffee sloshed onto the table. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floorboards. Clara froze, the pot hovering in midair. "I am sorry. I did not mean to spill." Jonah was breathing hard. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown. He looked at her, then down at his shoulder, then back at her. The panic in his face smoothed out, replaced by a rigid mask of control. "It is fine," he said. His voice was tight. "I am not used to people being close. In the morning." "I will be more careful," Clara said softly. He did not sit back down. He drank the coffee standing up, quickly, scalding his throat. "I have to ride the south fence line. There is bread in the box." He grabbed his hat and went out the back door, leaving his bacon untouched. Clara stood in the silence. It wasn't just that he was reclusive. He was afraid, or he was haunted. The flinch had been instinct, pure and animal. She spent the morning working. She scrubbed the floors. She found a pile of torn tack in the corner of the mudroom and found a needle and heavy thread in her trunk. She sat on the porch and stitched leather, the sun warming her hands. Around noon, a rider approached. It was not Jonah. This man rode a chestnut mare with a coat that shone like polished copper, a stark contrast to Jonah's rough-coated animals. He wore a fine vest and a hat with a silver band. He pulled up to the porch and leaned on his saddle horn, smiling. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You must be the new acquisition," he said. Clara set the harness down. "I am Clara Hale." The name felt strange on her tongue. "Hale?" The man laughed. "Beck Crow. My father owns the rolling sea, bordering this patch of dust. We heard Jonah finally ordered himself a bride." "My husband is out on the line," Clara said. Beck swung down from his horse. He walked to the porch railing. He looked Clara over, his eyes sliding over her plain dress, her hands rough from work. He smirked. "Well, now," he drawled. "I saw the paper in town weeks ago, the picture they had attached. It was a fair bit prettier than what I am seeing. Did the agency send the wrong crate?" Clara stood up. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice cold. "I am Etta's cousin. I am here in her place." Beck laughed again. "A replacement? That fits. Jonah Hale has always been a man who settles for what is left over. The land nobody wanted, the cattle nobody bid on, and now—" He gestured to her. "The replacement bride. If you have business with Mr. Hale, you can wait for him," Clara said. "If you are here to insult his wife, you can leave." Beck's smile vanished. His eyes went hard. "Tell Jonah that my father wants to discuss the water rights to the lower creek again. Tell him the offer stands, but the price goes down every week the drought holds on. Soon, we won't offer money at all. We will just take it." He mounted his horse. "Good luck, Mrs. Hale. You look like a sturdy thing. You will need to be—" He rode off, leaving a cloud of dust that hung in the still air. 3 days later, they went to town for supplies. Jonah needed flour and nails. Clara needed thread and lye for soap. They walked into the mercantile together. The store was crowded. The conversation died the moment they stepped through the door. Clara walked to the fabric counter. She could hear the whispers. They were not trying to hide them. "That's her," a woman in a bonnet whispered to her neighbor. "The leftover bride." Heard the pretty one ran off rather than marry him. A man near the stove chuckled. "Can you blame her, living out there with the ghost?" "Mail order mistake," another murmured. Clara picked up a bolt of calico. Her hands were trembling, but she forced them to be still. She focused on the weave of the fabric. 1, 2, 3, 4. She would not let them see her bleed. She felt Jonah move. He had been looking at kegs of nails at the back of the store. He walked toward the counter. He moved silently, like a predator. The man who had said mail order mistake, a clerk with slicked back hair, looked up and saw Jonah standing there. The clerk swallowed. Jonah did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply placed his hands on the counter. The wood creaked. "We are buying flour," Jonah said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was a voice that sounded like stones grinding together. "And we are buying thread. And we are doing it in a place of business. If this is not a place of business, if it is a place for talk, then I will take my money to the next county." The clerk went pale. "It is a place of business, Mr. Hale." "Of course." "Then weigh the flour," Jonah said, "and keep your mouth for counting." The silence in the store was absolute. People looked away. They shuffled back to their own affairs, giving Jonah a wide berth. Clara looked at him. His face was impassive, but his ears were red. He had defended her, not with love, perhaps, but with a fierce, territorial pride. "She is mine," his silence said. "Do not touch what is mine." On the ride home, the sky turned a bruised purple. The wind changed direction, blowing cold from the north. "Storm," Jonah said. They reached the ranch just as the first gusts hit. It wasn't rain. It was wind, pure and violent. It shrieked around the eaves of the house. "The north fence!" Jonah shouted over the roar. "The posts are old. If they go, the herd will scatter into the canyon." He jumped down and ran toward the barn to get fresh horses. Clara didn't think. She didn't wait to be told. She ran to the shed, grabbed a hammer and a bag of staples, and followed him. When Jonah led the horses out, he saw her standing there, holding the tools. He looked like he wanted to argue, but the wind tore the words away. He nodded. They rode to the north ridge. The wind was a physical weight, trying to push them out of the saddle. A section of barbed wire fence had blown flat. The rotted posts snapped at the base. The cattle were bunching near the gap, eyes rolling in panic. "Hold the wire," Jonah yelled. He jumped down and grabbed a post, struggling to upright it against the gale. Clara grabbed the taut, rusted wire. The barbs bit into her gloves. She pulled with all her weight, straining to get the slack out so Jonah could nail it. "Pull!" he shouted. She pulled. The wire groaned. Suddenly, the tension snapped. The wire whipped back. A barb caught the back of her hand, tearing through the glove and into the skin. Clara gasped, but she didn't let go. She grabbed the wire again, blood slicking her palm, and hauled it tight. "Nail it!" she screamed into the wind. Jonah hammered the staples home. They moved down the line, fighting the wind for every inch. It took an hour to secure the breach. By the time they finished, Clara was shaking from exhaustion and cold. They rode back to the barn in the dark. Inside, out of the wind, the silence was ringing. Jonah hung the lantern. He turned to her. "You are hurt." He took her hand. He pulled the ruined glove off gently. The cut was deep, a jagged line across the back of her hand, welling dark blood. "Come to the house," he said. "In the kitchen." He sat her down. He fetched a bowl of water, a clean rag, and a bottle of whiskey. He washed the dirt and blood away. His hands, so large and scarred, were surprisingly gentle. He held her wrist as if it were made of glass. He poured the whiskey over the cut. Clara hissed through her teeth, her toes curling in her boots. "Sorry," Jonah murmured. "It has to be clean." He dabbed the excess away. He did not let go of her hand. He looked at the cut. Then he looked up at her face. They were close, closer than they had been since she arrived. The lamplight cast deep shadows in the hollows of his face. She could smell the rain that hadn't fallen, the sweat of the work, and the scent of pine soap on his skin. Clara felt a sudden, sharp heat in her chest. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a pull. She looked at his mouth, stern and set, and wondered what it would feel like if it softened. She saw his eyes darken. He was looking at her lips. For a second, the air between them hummed, tighter than the fence wire. He leaned in, just an inch. Then he blinked. The mask slammed back down. He dropped her hand and stood up, moving away to the other side of the room. "It will need a bandage," he said roughly. "I will get the linen." Clara sat there, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt flushed, confused. She felt the fear of being wanted, because the last time she had been wanted, it had been a transaction. But this felt like a question. She needed air. While he rummaged in the cupboard, she stepped out the back door. The wind had died down. The clouds were breaking. She walked behind the barn, needing to cool her face. In the moonlight, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. Behind the barn, where the grass gave way to scrub, there was a patch of earth that was black and bare. No grass grew there. She walked closer. She nudged the dirt with her boot. Beneath the top layer of dust, she found charred wood, old, black beams, half buried, remnants of a structure that had burned down to the ground. It was a house, a small one. It had stood here, years ago. She looked at the blackened ruin, then back at the main house where Jonah lived alone in his spare rooms. He didn't just lose someone, she thought. He lost everything. The fire explained the scars on his hands. It explained the flinch. It explained the silence that wasn't just quiet, but an absence. She went back inside. Jonah was waiting with the bandage. He wrapped her hand efficiently, not meeting her eyes. "Jonah," she said. He tied the knot. "Yes. I saw the burnt ground, behind the barn." Jonah's hand stilled. He stood up slowly. He looked at her, and for a moment, he looked incredibly tired. The hardness drained out of him, leaving only the exhaustion. "I did not ask to buy a wife. Clara," he said. His voice was flat, honest. "The broker, he said it was a way to settle the claim. A business arrangement. I did not ask for a woman to come here and bleed for my fence." "I chose to help," Clara said. "You should not have had to," he said. "This is a hard place, and I am not a whole man. I have little to give you." He walked to the window and looked out at the dark. "But I will not send you back," he said. "I heard what they said in town. I saw how Mrs. Hatcher looked at you. If you go back, you have nothing. If you stay," he turned to face her. "If you stay, you have a roof. You have food. I will not mistreat you. I will not ask you for things you do not wish to give. It is not much of a life, but it is a safe one." Clara looked at him. She touched the bandage on her hand. She thought of the replacement insults. She thought of the charred ground. She thought of the way he had stood between her and the clerk's cruelty. It was a marriage of convenience. It was a cage, perhaps. But as she looked at Jonah Hale, standing in the shadows of his own kitchen, terrified of his own needs, she realized it could be something else. It could be a shelter. For both of them. "I am staying," Clara said. Jonah nodded. "Once. Then get some sleep. We have fence to finish tomorrow." He blew out the lamp, leaving them in the darkness, together. The weeks that followed Clara's arrival did not pass so much as they ground forward, day by heavy day, like a wagon wheel cutting a rut into hardpan. The ranch was not a place of romance. It was a machine made of muscle and wood and iron, designed to turn grass into beef and sweat into survival. And it demanded everything from the people who lived on it. Clara had thought she knew work. In Ohio, she had scrubbed floors and mended shirts until her eyes burned. But the work of Cottonwood Valley was different. It was elemental. It was a proving ground where the judge was not a stepfather with a harsh voice, but the land itself. She learned the morning routine first. It began in the dark, at 4 o'clock, when the air was still cold enough to bite through wool. She took over the milking of the 2 Jersey cows Jonah kept for the house. The first time she tried, the older cow, a ornery beast named Bess, kicked the bucket halfway across the barn. Jonah had been watching from the stall where he was saddling his horse. He did not laugh. He did not step in to do it for her. He simply watched to see if she would pick up the bucket. Clara picked up the bucket. She dusted it off, walked back to the cow, and spoke low and firm, pressing her forehead against the animal's warm flank. She milked until her forearms ached and the pail was frothing. When she stood up, Jonah gave a single, sharp nod and led his horse out into the gray dawn. That nod felt like a metal pinned to her chest. She learned to stitch torn tack, driving the heavy needle through stiff leather until her fingers were calloused and stained with oil. She learned to ride, not the gentle trotting she had done once or twice as a girl, but the functional, balanced riding required to move across uneven ground without tiring the horse. She learned the geography of Jonah's silence. At first, his silence had felt like a wall. Now, she began to see it as a landscape. There was the silence of concentration when he was splicing a rope. There was the silence of exhaustion when he came in after dark, dust coating his eyelashes. And there was the silence of peace, rare and fragile, when he sat on the porch for 10 minutes after supper, watching the stars wheel overhead. Clara's own internal world began to shift. For years, she had survived by being agreeable. She had made herself small, soft, and smiling, because that was what kept her stepfather's temper at bay. She had trained herself to be an echo of what men wanted her to be, But the ranch had no use for echoes. A smile would not fix a fence. A soft voice would not turn a stubborn calf. Jonah's steadiness, his absolute lack of pretense, made her want to drop the act. He did not want a performance. He wanted a partner. The desire to be real, to show her frustration and her fatigue and her strength, was a terrifying thing. It scared her more than the hunger she had known in Ohio. If she showed him her true self and he rejected it, she would have nothing left to protect her. The valley offered no mercy to ease her transition. The drought that had begun in the spring deepened as summer wore on. The sky remained a relentless, blinding blue. Day after day, the grass on the hills turned the color of cured tobacco and shattered underfoot. The creek, which should have been running calf-deep, was reduced to a series of stagnant, muddy pools. One evening, Clara found Jonah in the barn, staring at the feed bins. The lantern light threw long, distorted shadows against the walls. He had a notebook in his hand and was counting bags of oats. "The lower well dropped another foot today," he said without turning around. He spoke to the air, or perhaps to the horses. Clara set down the bucket of water she had carried from the house. "How long will the water last?" "If we are careful, 6 weeks," Jonah said. "If the heat breaks, maybe 8. If it does not break, and the creek dries entirely." He closed the notebook with a snap. "I am measuring feed like arithmetic can beat disaster, but the numbers do not change." He looked tired. The lines around his eyes were etched deep with dust. He carried the weight of the livestock, the mortgage, and now her, all on shoulders that never slumped but were surely straining. Clara did not offer false hope. She did not say it would rain. Instead, she went to work on the things she could control. She reorganized the pantry, taking stock of every ounce of flour and sugar, creating a rationing system that stretched their supplies by a third. She found a patch of wild herbs near the dry creek bed, sage and willow bark, and made salves. When one of the ranch hands, a young man named Tommy Reyes, cut his arm on a rusted nail, Clara stitched it and dressed it with her salve, saving Jonah the cost of a doctor from town. She traded, too, on their next trip to town. She took a basket of mended shirts and intricate lacework she had done by firelight. She took them to the mercantile and bartered with the clerk, not the rude one, but his wife, for quinine and fresh vegetables. She did not ask Jonah for money. She simply placed the vegetables on the table that night. Jonah looked at the green beans and the fresh carrots. He looked at Clara. He did not say thank you, but he ate a second helping. And later, when he passed her in the kitchen, he paused. "The garden is dead," he said. "Where did these come from?" "I traded some sewing," Clara said, scrubbing a pot. Jonah stood there for a long moment. "You did not have to do that." "I know," Clara said, "but the stew needed carrots." He watched her, his expression unreadable, then turned away. But the next day, he left a small bag of peppermint sticks on the kitchen table for her. It was a frivolous expense, a waste of money they did not have, and it was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. But the town remained a cold place. On Sundays, Jonah drove her to the small white church at the edge of Cottonwood. He did not go in. He claimed he had to watch the horses, or check a harness. But Clara knew he simply could not abide the stairs. She went in alone. She walked down the center aisle, her head high, wearing her brushed traveling dress. The pews were filled with families, the women in their Sunday bonnets, the men in stiff collars. As she approached a pew near the front, a woman named Mrs. Miller, the banker's wife, deliberately placed her handbag on the empty spot beside her. She looked Clara in the eye, her face a mask of pious exclusion, and turned her shoulder. Clara paused. The hymn had not yet started. The silence in the church was heavy. She moved to the next pew. 2 young women giggled behind their hymn books and spread their skirts wide to take up the space. Clara walked to the very back of the church. She sat on a wooden bench near the door, where the draft came in. She opened her Bible and stared at the words until they blurred. She could feel the judgment radiating from the backs of their heads. Replacement. Leftover. Bought woman. After the service, she hurried out, desperate to reach the safety of the wagon. A man was leaning against the hitching post near Jonah's team. It was a ranch hand from the Rolling Sea, one of Silas Crow's men. He was chewing on a toothpick. "Morning, Mrs. Hale," he drawled as she approached. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her chest. "Must be lonely out there in the rocks. If you ever get tired of the quiet, there are plenty of boys at the bunkhouse who would appreciate a woman with experience." The implication was clear. A woman who could be bought for a contract was a woman who could be bought for anything. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, hot and stinging. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. Instead, she smiled. It was a thin, brittle thing, like ice over deep water. "My husband is waiting," she said. She climbed into the wagon before the first tear could fall. Jonah was already there, checking the reins. He looked at her face. He saw the tightness of her mouth, the sheen of moisture in her eyes. He looked at the man by the hitching post. Jonah's hands tightened on the leather until his knuckles turned white. He did not say a word. He simply clicked to the horses and drove them out of town at a pace that dared anyone to follow. His silence was not empty. It was a shield. He did not ask what happened. He spared her the shame of repeating it. But that evening, he chopped wood for 2 hours after dark, the rhythmic thwack of the axe echoing like a heartbeat against the hills. Despite the harshness of the world outside, the ranch was becoming a sanctuary. And in that sanctuary, something was shifting between them. It was not a sudden conflagration of passion. It was slower than that, deeper, like the roots of the cottonwood trees seeking water in the dark earth. Jonah's restraint became a language Clara began to understand. He was a man of immense physical strength, capable of wrestling a steer to the ground, yet he moved around her with careful precision. He never touched her without warning. He never cornered her in the small kitchen. He never demanded the wifely duties that the contract and the law entitled him to. Clara had expected demand. She had expected to be taken. Jonah's refusal to take, his absolute insistence on her autonomy, made her feel something she hadn't expected. She began to want him. It was a desire that grew in the quiet moments, a feeling of being chosen rather than possessed. One afternoon, a mule named Jasper decided he would go no further. He stopped dead in the middle of the yard, refusing to pull the cart of firewood. Jonah pulled on the lead rope. He shouted. He slapped the mule's flank with his hat. Jasper planted his hooves and laid his ears back, the very picture of obstinance. Clara was watching from the porch. She saw Jonah's frustration, the way he wiped sweat from his forehead with a groan. She walked down the steps. "He does not like the hat," she said. Jonah looked at her. "He is a mule. He does not have fashion opinions. He thinks you are angry," Clara said. She walked up to the mule. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a dried apple slice she had saved. She held it out. "Jasper!" The mule's ears twitched. He stretched his neck out. He took the apple with a velvety-lipped crunch. Clara stroked his nose and whispered something in his ear. Then she took the lead rope from Jonah's astonished hand and clicked her tongue. Jasper walked forward as if he had been planning to all along. Clara looked back at Jonah. He was standing there, his hat in his hand, dust on his face, and he was smiling. It was a rusty, unused expression, one side of his mouth quirking up, crinkling the scar on his temple. Then he laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, like a bark, but it was real. "I have been fighting that animal for 3 years, Jonah said, shaking his head. "And you bought him for a slice of apple? Men are stubborn," Clara said, smiling back. "Mules just want a snack." The air between them felt lighter, charged with a sudden, easy camaraderie. A few days later, the mood shifted to something thicker. Coyotes had been getting bold, coming close to the chicken coop. Jonah decided Clara needed to know how to shoot the rifle, not just the shotgun. He set up tin cans on the fence line. He handed her the heavy Winchester. "Tuck it tight against your shoulder," he said. "If you leave a gap, it will bruise you." Clara raised the rifle. It was heavy, The barrel wavered. "Steady," Jonah said. He stepped in close behind her. He did not touch her at first. He just stood there, his chest inches from her back. She could feel the heat radiating from him. She could smell the tobacco and leather and the clean, masculine scent of him. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Elbow up," he murmured. His voice was right at her ear, a low rumble that vibrated in her spine. He reached around her to adjust her grip. His arm brushed hers. His hand covered hers on the stock, large and rough and warm. For a second, he didn't move away. He held her there, encompassed by his body, shielding her and guiding her all at once. The world narrowed down to the point where his skin touched hers. Clara leaned back, just a fraction of an inch. She wanted to lean all the way. She wanted to rest against him. Jonah froze. He seemed to realize how close they were, how the air had suddenly turned to syrup. He stepped back abruptly, clearing his throat. "Keep your eye on the sight," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Squeeze. Do not pull." He walked a few paces away, turning his back to watch the horizon. He was protecting her, she realized, protecting her from his own want, and the knowledge of that want made her aim waver more than the weight of the gun ever could. The stakes of their struggle were raised the following week. It began with a visit from Sheriff Laird. Laird was a man who wore his badge like a threat rather than a promise. He was heavy-set, with eyes that looked like wet pebbles and a smile that showed too many gums. He rode onto the ranch with 2 deputies, ostensibly to check livestock brands and licenses. Clara was on the porch, churning butter. Jonah came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sheriff," Jonah said. He did not invite the man down. "Jonah," Laird said, shifting in his saddle. "Just making the rounds, seeing how the drought is treating the small operations?" "We are managing," Jonah said. Laird's eyes drifted to the porch. He looked at Clara. His gaze was slow and oily, sliding over her figure in a way that made her feel like she needed to wash. "So you got your replacement settled in," Laird said. "Heard about that. A convenient arrangement." "Is there business, Laird?" Jonah asked. His voice was ice cold. "Just friendly advice," Laird said. Turning back to Jonah, "Silas Crow has been looking at the old county maps. Seems there is some confusion about the water rights on this creek, some papers that might not have been filed correctly back in '65. My father filed those papers," Jonah said. "The rights are clear." "Paper fades," Laird said with a shrug. "And fire takes things. Crow is a reasonable man. If it turns out you are drawing water illegally, he might be willing to buy you out. Before the law has to get involved." "The water is mine," Jonah said. "And the land is mine. Tell Crow to check his maps again." Laird chuckled. "I will tell him. But you know how it is. Jonah, things get lost. People get lost. Like that first bride of yours. Shame about her. Would be a shame if this one found the valley too hard." He tipped his hat to Clara, a gesture of mockery, and rode off. Jonah stood watching them go until they were specks on the road. He did not speak, but Clara saw the tremor in his hands before he clenched them into fists. That afternoon, shaken by the sheriff's visit and his mention of Etta, Clara went to her trunk. She needed to feel the connection to her old life, to remind herself of who she was. She began to unpack the bottom layer, lifting out the heavy winter woolens she hadn't needed yet. Her fingers brushed against the lining at the bottom of the trunk. It felt loose. She pressed down and heard the crinkle of paper. Her heart skipped a beat. She felt along the seam until she found a small tear in the fabric. She worked her fingers inside and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a letter. The handwriting was frantic, the ink smeared in places as if by haste or tears. It was from Etta. Clara sat on the floor and unfolded it. "Clara, if you are reading this, I am gone. I could not stay. Father thinks I am running from a loveless marriage, and he is right. But it is more than that. I heard them talking, Mr. Crow and the man from the bank. The marriage contract. It isn't just about a wife. There is a clause about the land transfer if the line fails. They want Jonah Hale to marry so they can leverage him. They have something on him. Clara, or they plan to create something. I saw the way Crow looked at me when I arrived. He looked at me like I was a key to a door he wanted to kick down. I am not brave like you. I cannot be the key. I am running. Do not come here. The valley is a trap. Clara lowered the letter. Her hands were shaking. Etta hadn't just run off with a Bible salesman for love. She had run because she was terrified, and the family had sent Clara into the trap in her place. That night, the weather broke, but not with the gentle rain they prayed for. It came with violence. Thunder rolled down from the mountains like artillery fire. Lightning split the sky, turning the night into a strobe-lit nightmare of white and black. The wind howled, slamming against the house. "The horses!" Jonah shouted, grabbing his coat. "The corral gate is loose!" Clara grabbed her shawl and followed him. Outside, the world was chaos. Rain lashed down in sheets, turning the dust instantly into slick, treacherous mud. The horses were screaming, rearing in the corral, their eyes rolling white in the lightning flashes. The gate was swinging wildly in the wind. Jonah ran for the lead horse, trying to calm him. Clara ran for the gate. She struggled to push it closed against the wind. Her boots slipped in the muck. She went down hard, landing on her hip in the mud. A crack of thunder shook the ground. The horses bolted toward the opening. "Clara!" Jonah screamed. He abandoned the horse he was holding. He threw himself across the mud, moving faster than she had ever seen a man move. He reached her just as the hooves were bearing down. He grabbed her waist and rolled, pulling her tight against his chest, shielding her body with his own. They slammed into the fence post. Jonah took the impact with a grunt. The horses thundered past them, escaping into the night. But Clara was safe. She was pressed against him, her cheek against his wet coat, his heart hammering like a trapped bird against her ear. His arm was a band of iron around her waist. His legs were tangled with hers. The rain poured down on them. Jonah looked down. A flash of lightning illuminated his face, wet, wild, and terrified. Not for himself, but for her. "Are you hurt?" he yelled over the storm. "No," she gasped. "Jonah, the horses. Damn the horses," he said. "Are you hurt?" "I am fine." He didn't let go. For a long moment, they lay there in the mud and the rain, bound together by adrenaline and the sheer shock of survival. His hand moved from her waist to her face, his thumb brushing the mud from her cheek. His touch was burning hot against the cold rain. He stared at her, his eyes searching hers. In that look, the last of the distance between them evaporated. He wasn't the employer. She wasn't the replacement. They were a man and a woman who had almost lost each other. Then, the mask returned. He pulled back, his expression closing off. He helped her up, his hands careful and distant again. "Go inside," he said. "Get dry. I will round them up when the lightning passes." Later dried off and wrapped in a quilt by the fire. Jonah finally spoke of the past. He sat on the hearth, staring at the flames. He held a mug of coffee with shaking hands. "The fire," he said quietly. "It was 10 years ago. My brother and his wife." Clara sat very still. "Is that who lived in the house behind the barn?" Jonah nodded. "I lived in the bunkhouse then. It was a lightning strike. In the middle of the night, the roof collapsed before I could get to them. I pulled them out, but it was too late." He looked at his hands, the scars showing white in the firelight. "After that, I made a promise," he said. "I promised I would never need anyone again. I promised I would never let anyone else decide my life. I would hold this land, and I would do it alone, because when you love people, you cannot always save them. And the pain of not saving them is worse than the fire." He looked at Clara. "That is why I fought the contract. That is why I did not want you here. Because now that you are here, I have something to lose again." Clara felt her heart crack open. It wasn't rejection. It was the opposite. He was terrified of loving her because he was terrified of the loss that love implied. She thought of her own training. Her mother had taught her that men's desire was a danger, a consuming fire that took and took. Her stepfather had taught her that her value lay in her obedience. But this fear in Jonah's eyes? It wasn't danger. It was an invitation. It was a plea to be known, to be held, to be anchored. Jonah set the mug down. "I should check the horses." He stood up to leave. He was running away again, retreating into the safety of the storm, because the intimacy of the fireside was too much. "Jonah," Clara said. He stopped. He did not turn. Clara stood up. She walked across the room. Her legs were trembling, but her spirit was steady. She stopped beside him. She reached out. She did not grab him. She simply placed her fingers on the back of his hand, the one that hung by his side. Her fingertips rested on the rough, scarred skin. It was a question. Is this allowed? Can we cross this line? Jonah went rigid. He looked down at her hand on his. He could have pulled away. He could have walked out the door. He didn't. Slowly, agonizingly slowly. He turned his hand over. His palm met hers. He laced his fingers through hers, engulfing her hand in his warmth. He squeezed, just once, a pressure that was firm and desperate and undeniable. He didn't look at her face. He couldn't bear that yet. But he held her hand, and in the quiet of the kitchen, while the storm raged outside, that silent permission felt louder than any vow ever spoken in a church. "Stay safe inside," he whispered. "Come back to me," she whispered back. He squeezed her hand one last time, then released her and walked out into the rain. But this time, he didn't take all the warmth with him. The trouble began with silence where there should have been sound. Jonah Hale knew the rhythm of his land the way a carpenter knows the grain of wood. He knew that at dawn. The south pasture should echo with the lowing of the herd moving toward the creek. But on a Tuesday morning in late August, the air was still. He rode out with Clara beside him. She sat her horse with a newfound ease, her spine straight, her hands light on the reins. The weeks of labor had stripped the softness from her, replacing it with a lean, wire-tight strength. She wore a split riding skirt she had fashioned herself from an old pair of denim trousers, a practical choice that had caused Mrs. Hatcher at the boarding house to cross herself when Clara rode through town. They found the cut in the wire 3 miles south of the house. It was not a break caused by wind or a panicked steer. It was a clean, deliberate severing. The strands curled back like copper snakes. Jonah dismounted. He crouched by the dirt, reading the story written there. 12 head, he said. His voice was gravel. Driven hard. Clara looked at the tracks. They led south, crossing the dry creek bed and disappearing into the scrubland that marked the border of the rolling sea. Silas Crow's land. "We should go after them," Clara said. Her voice was steady, but her grip on the reins tightened. Jonah stood up. He looked at the distant line of hills where Crow's empire began. "If we ride onto his land to claim cattle without a brand inspector, he will shoot us for trespassing, and the law will side with him. That is the game he is playing. He wants me to cross the line, so we just let him take them. We survive," Jonah said, swinging back into the saddle. "We lose 12 to save the 100, but this is not rustling. Clara, this is a siege." The siege tightened 2 days later. A man in a bowler hat and a dust-coated suit arrived in a buggy. He set up a surveyor's tripod near the windmill, well within Jonah's property line. Jonah rode out to meet him. Clara, watching from the porch with a shotgun, leaned against the railing. She saw Jonah speak to the man. She saw the man shrug and point to a map. She saw Jonah's hand drift toward the rifle scabbard on his saddle, then stop. He was a man fighting a war against his own instincts, holding back the violence that had once defined his life. When he returned to the house, his face was a mask of gray stone. "He says the original survey from 1870 was flawed," Jonah said, stripping the saddle off his horse with angry, jerky movements. "He says the water rights follow the old creek bed, which moved 10 years ago. He is marking a new line. It cuts us off from the only water that's still running." "That is a lie," Clara said. "The deed is in the strong box. A deed is just paper if the county clerk decides to lose the copy." Jonah said, "I have to go to the county seat. I have to file a contest before they register the new survey. I will go with you, Clara said. No. Jonah turned to her. It is a 2-day ride. I cannot leave the ranch empty. If Crow sees us both leave, the house will be ashes when we return. You have Tommy Reyes and the dogs. Keep the shotgun loaded. Do not go to town. He left before dawn the next day. The house felt vast and hollow without him. Clara worked with a frantic energy, scrubbing, mending, canning the last of the stringy beans from the dying garden. But by the second day, the coffee tin was empty, and they were out of salt for the curing. She had to go to town. I will be quick, she told Tommy Reyes, who was greasing the wagon axle. I will be back before sunset. Cottonwood was sweltering. The heat waves shimmied off the roofs. Clara kept her head down as she walked to the mercantile. She bought the coffee and the salt. She counted her coins carefully. She had $3 left from the money Jonah had left in the jar. As she stepped out onto the boardwalk, a shadow fell over her. Sheriff Laird leaned against a support post, blocking her path. He was whittling a piece of cedar with a long-bladed knife. Mrs. Hale, he said. The title sounded like an insult in his mouth. Husband out of town? He will be back tonight, Clara said, moving to step around him. Laird moved with surprising speed, planting his boot in front of her. He did not touch her, but he crowded her space, smelling of stale whiskey and hair oil. You know, Laird said conversationally, examining the point of his knife. I had a wire from a friend in Ohio. Interesting place, Ohio. Lots of stories there. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The street seemed to tilt. He told me about a girl named Clara, Laird went on. Daughter of a debtor. Stepfather sold her labor to a hotel to pay off a gambling tab. Spent 2 years changing sheets and emptying chamber pots for traveling men. Rumor says she did more than change sheets. Rumor says she was ruined. That is a lie, Clara whispered. Her throat felt like it was full of dust. It was not a lie. Not entirely. Her stepfather had indeed leased her out as a maid to pay his debts. She had worked 16 hours a day, scrubbing floors until her knees bled, enduring the pinches and the lewd whispers of the guests. She had fought them off, once with a heavy brass candlestick that had cost her a week's wages to replace. But the town had talked anyway. In the eyes of the world, a woman without protection was a woman without virtue. Is it? Laird smiled. Does Jonah know? Does he know he bought damaged goods? Or did you trick him, just like your cousin tried to trick Crow? Let me pass, Clara said. You should be careful. Clara, Laird said, his voice dropping to a hiss. Women disappear in this country. Like Etta, sometimes they run away. Sometimes the land just swallows them. If Jonah continues to be stubborn, it would be a tragedy if you were to get lost. He stepped back, tipping his hat with mock gallantry. Clara fled to the wagon. She did not cry. She was past crying. A cold, hard anger was crystallizing in her chest, sharp as a diamond. Jonah returned long after dark. He looked exhausted. His shoulders slumped. He sat at the kitchen table and stared at the unlit lamp. The clerk was gone, he said flatly. Fishing. His assistant could not find the file. They said I have to come back next month. Next month will be too late, Clara said. I know. Jonah looked at her. He saw the tension in her jaw. What happened? Nothing. Clara lied. She would not add to his burden. Not tonight. But the tension between them had changed. It was no longer the polite distance of strangers. It was the taut, vibrating tension of two people standing back to back in a knife fight. The next evening, the sky turned a bruised purple, threatening a storm that never broke. The air was heavy with electricity. I need to check the canyon, Jonah said after supper. Tommy thinks he heard calves bawling. I'm coming, Clara said. Jonah started to object, then stopped. He nodded. Get your coat. They rode into the canyon as the light failed. The walls of rock rose up around them, holding the heat of the day. They found no calves, only the wind whistling through the scrub oak. As they turned back, a rattlesnake, seeking the warmth of the path, struck at Jonah's horse. The gelding reared, screaming. Jonah fought for control, the heavy animal twisting in the air. Clara didn't think. She drove her mare forward, cutting between the snake and the rearing horse. She pulled her revolver, the heavy Colt Jonah had taught her to use, and fired into the dirt. The snake coiled and slithered into the rocks. "Steady!" Jonah shouted, bringing his horse down. He reached out and grabbed Clara's bridle to keep her mare from bolting. They sat there for a moment, chests heaving, the smell of gunpowder and horse sweat sharp in the air. The adrenaline was a drumbeat in Clara's ears. "You could have been thrown," Jonah said. His voice was rough. "I wasn't," Clara said. They rode back in silence, but the air between them was crackling. When they reached the barn, they unsaddled the horses without speaking. The intimacy of the work, the brush against a flank, the lifting of a heavy saddle, the shared darkness was overwhelming. Jonah hung his bridle on the peg. He stood there, his back to her, breathing hard. Clara watched him. She thought of Laird's words, damaged goods. She thought of the way Jonah had defended her in the store. She thought of the fire that had taken his family and the fear that ruled him. She was tired of being afraid. She was tired of being a transaction. "Jonah," she said. He turned. The lantern light cast deep shadows across his face. He looked dangerous. He looked terrified. "Why do you keep me here?" she asked. "Clara." "No." She stepped closer. She dropped the mask of the obedient wife. "Do not tell me it is for the contract. Do not tell me it is because you are honorable. I need to know. Do you want me here? Or do you only feel responsible for me?" Jonah stared at her. His hands were clenched at his sides. "You know the answer to that." "I do not," Clara said. "I know you are kind. I know you are decent. But I do not want decency. I have had decency. It is cold." Jonah took a step toward her. The restraint in his face cracked. "I'm afraid," he rasped. "I'm afraid that if I touch you, I will not be able to stop. I'm afraid that I will be just another thing that takes from you." "You are not taking," Clara said. Her voice shook, but she held her ground. "I am giving." She closed the distance. She reached up and took his face in her hands. His skin was rough with stubble, hot to the touch. She pulled him down. She kissed him. It was not a tentative kiss. It was a claim. It was an answer to the emptiness of the sky and the cruelty of the town. Jonah went still for a heartbeat. Then a groan tore out of his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, crushing her against him. He kissed her back with a hunger that stole the breath from her lungs. It was a desperate, starving thing, tasting of salt and dust and months of silence. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes were dark, burning. "Clara," he whispered, "are you sure? Once we cross this—" "I am sure," she said. "I am not Etta. I am not a replacement. I am here." He swept her up into his arms. He carried her not to the house, but to the small tack room at the back of the barn, where a cot was set up for calving nights. It was a rough place, smelling of leather and hay, but it was theirs. He set her down. He did not rush. He did not tear at her clothes. He unbuttoned her dress with trembling hands, treating every inch of skin he revealed as if it were holy ground. Clara had been taught that this act was a duty, a price women paid for shelter. But with Jonah, it was a conversation. It was the way he paused when her breath hitched, waiting for her eyes to meet his. It was the way his heavy, scarred hands traced the line of her ribs with a reverence that made her want to weep. "Clara," he said her name into the darkness, over and over, as if he were memorizing it. When they finally came together, it was not polished. It was frantic and clumsy and deeply, painfully real. It was the desperate connection of two people who had been alone for a lifetime, and in the heat of it, Clara realized that the desire coursing through her was not something that had been done to her. It belonged to her. It was her own fire, and Jonah was not trying to put it out. He was warming himself by it. He grounded her. When the old shame rose up, the memories of the hotel and the whispers, he anchored her with his weight and his gaze. He did not claim her. He let her claim him. They fell asleep, tangled together under a horse blanket, the storm outside finally breaking into a gentle rain. The morning light was cruel. It cut through the cracks in the barn wood, illuminating the dust motes and the reality of the day. Clara woke to find Jonah sitting on the edge of the cot, pulling on his boots. His back was to her. The line of his shoulders was rigid. She felt a sudden rush of cold. She pulled the blanket up. "Jonah?" He turned. He looked younger in the morning light, his hair messy. The lines of worry smoothed for a moment, but then the shame flooded into his eyes. Not shame for the act, but shame for his own weakness. He had broken his rule. He had needed— "I should not have— Here, in the barn," he stammered. He stood up, putting distance between them. "It was disrespectful. You deserve a proper bed, a proper life." "I do not care about the bed," Clara said. "I do," he said. He grabbed his coat. "I have to check the horses." He fled. It was a retreat, swift and absolute. Clara dressed alone. Her hands were shaking. She felt exposed, her skin raw. Had she misread him? Had the hunger been just that, hunger, and now that he was fed, he saw only the replacement bride again? No. She remembered the way he had said her name. He was not rejecting her. He was terrified of what he had opened. They moved around each other carefully in the kitchen. Jonah drank his coffee standing up. "We have to go to town," he said abruptly. "The hearing for the water rights contest requires a witness signature. You have to sign that you live here." "I will get my hat," Clara said. The drive to town was silent, but it was a heavy silence, pregnant with the things they weren't saying. Jonah kept glancing at her, his eyes lingering on her hands, her mouth, then darting away when she looked back. Cottonwood was busy. It was a market day. Wagons lined the street. They went to the courthouse first. Jonah was tense, his hand hovering near his hip. They signed the papers. The clerk sneered but stamped the document. "We need flour," Clara said as they walked out. "And sugar." They went to the general store. It was crowded. Mrs. Miller was there, and the sheriff. Clara moved down the aisle, picking up a sack of sugar. She felt eyes on her. She kept her head high. She was Jonah Hale's wife. She knew the shape of his scars. She knew the sound of his breathing. Let them stare. She placed the items on the counter. The clerk, the rude one with the slick hair, rang them up. $2.50, he said. Clara reached into her reticule. "Wait," the clerk said. He pointed a finger at her bag. "What is that?" Clara frowned. "What?" "I saw you," the clerk said, his voice rising. "I saw you slip that silver brooch into your bag, the one from the display case." The store went silent. "I did no such thing," Clara said, her voice shaking with indignation. "Open the bag," Sheriff Laird said, stepping forward from the corner where he had been lurking. "This is ridiculous," Jonah said, stepping to Clara's side. "She has stolen nothing?" "Open the bag. Mrs. Hale," Laird said. His hand rested on his gun belt. "Unless you have something to hide, like in Ohio." Clara's fingers trembled as she opened the reticule. She dumped the contents onto the counter. Her coin purse, a handkerchief, the shopping list, and a silver brooch, shaped like a dove, tangled in the lace of her handkerchief. Clara stared at it. She had never touched it. "A thief, Mrs. Miller gasped. "I knew it. Trash is always trash." "Replacement thief," someone muttered. "That is $10 worth of silver," the clerk said smugly. "I want her arrested." "Sheriff," Laird smiled. It was a wolf smile. "Well now, Jonah, looks like your wife is a criminal. I will have to take her into custody. We have a cell available." Clara felt the room spinning. It was a trap, a crude, brutal trap designed to separate them, to humiliate her, to put her in a cage where Crow's men could get to her. She looked at Jonah. Jonah did not look at the brooch. He did not look at the sheriff. He looked at Clara. He saw the fear in her eyes. He saw the shame threatening to swallow her. And he exploded. It was not a loud explosion. It was the terrifying quiet of a glacier cracking. He stepped between Clara and the sheriff. He moved with a lethality that made the men in the store take a collective step back. "How much?" Jonah asked the clerk. What? The brooch, Jonah said. You say it is worth $10. How much? $10. The clerk squeaked. Jonah reached into his pocket. He pulled out a leather pouch. It contained the money for the winter feed. He counted out $10 in gold coins. He slammed them onto the counter. The sound cracked like a gunshot. It is paid for, Jonah said. He swept the brooch onto the floor. He ground it under the heel of his boot until the silver twisted and broke. Now it is trash, Jonah said. Like this store, like this town. He turned to Laird. His voice dropped an octave, vibrating with a menace that made the sheriff's hand falter on his gun. If you touch her, Jonah said. If you ever say her name again, I will burn this town to the bedrock. Do you understand me? Laird swallowed. He nodded. We are leaving, Jonah said. He took Clara's arm. He did not drag her. He held her as if she were a queen. He walked her out of the store, through the staring crowd, and lifted her into the wagon. He drove them out of town. He did not stop until they were 5 miles out, under the shelter of the cottonwoods by the river. He pulled the horses up. He set the brake. Clara was shaking. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her cold and nauseous. She covered her face with her hands. They planted it, she sobbed. I did not take it. I know, Jonah said. He turned to her on the seat. He took her hands away from her face. I know. Clara, I never doubted it for a second. Clara looked at him. The trust in his eyes broke her. The dam she had built around her past, around the truth of why she was there, crumbled. You do not know everything, she whispered. Jonah, I have to tell you. I have to tell you why I'm here. You are here because Etta ran away. No, Clara said. I am here because they sent me. My stepfather and Etta's father. They owed money to the bank. Crow owns the banknotes. He told them that if they did not send a bride who would be grateful, a bride who would do what she was told, he would call in the debts. They sent me because they thought I was weak. They thought I would convince you to sign the land over, or that I would sign it over myself if you died. She choked on the words. I was not chosen. Jonah, I was a tool. I was used to get to you. She waited for the anger. She waited for him to tell her to get out, to walk back to Ohio. Jonah sat there for a long time. The wind rustled the leaves overhead. He looked at her tear-streaked face. He looked at the strength in her jaw, the honesty in her eyes. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His thumb brushed her cheek, tender and possessive. They thought you were weak, he asked softly. Yes, then they are fools, Jonah said. He leaned in. His eyes were clear, the fear gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They can try to take the land, Jonah said. They can try to burn the fences, but they do not get to use you. Not here, not ever again. He kissed her forehead. It was a seal, a promise. Let us go home, he said. We have a war to fight. He slapped the reins, and the wagon rolled forward, carrying them toward the ranch. No longer 2 strangers in a contract, but an army of 2. The wind changed in early November. It ceased to be a movement of air and became a weapon. It swept down from the Canadian Shield, crossing the flatlands with a whistle that sounded like a knife being sharpened on a whetstone. It stripped the last of the gold from the cottonwoods and left the branches bare and shivering against a sky the color of bruised iron. Winter had arrived early in Cottonwood Valley, and it had arrived with a grudge. Survival became a matter of daily arithmetic. Jonah sat at the kitchen table every evening, the lamp oil burning low, doing sums that never seemed to balance. 40 head of cattle, 600 bales of hay. If the snow held off, they could graze the upper pasture until December. If the snow came deep and hard, the feed would run out by February. Clara watched him. She saw the way his hand rubbed the scar on his temple when the numbers refused to yield. She saw the way he ate less, pushing the meat onto her plate when he thought she wasn't looking. Eat, she would say, pushing it back. I am not hungry. He would lie. You cannot pull a calf out of a snowdrift on empty air. She would answer, They were a team now, forged in the heat of the summer and the anger of the town. But the pressure was relentless. The valley was tightening its grip. The blow from Silas Crow came not with a gunshot, but with a piece of paper. It was delivered by a rider who did not stop. He simply galloped past the main gate and threw a weighted oilskin packet into the dust. Tommy Reyes, the young ranch hand who had stayed on despite the threats, brought it to the house. His face was pale. "It is for you, Mrs. Hale," Tommy said, looking at the floor. "But it is not sealed." Clara opened it on the porch. The wind tore at the edges of the paper. It was a legal document, an affidavit sworn before a judge in Ohio. Attached to it was a letter from a man named Mr. Finch, the owner of the hotel where Clara had worked. The words were precise and venomous. Mr. Finch claimed that Clara Wren was a woman of loose morals and light fingers, that she had been dismissed for soliciting guests, and that she had fled the state to avoid charges of theft and indecency. It was a fabrication, a twisted version of the truth where her victimization was painted as her sin. But at the bottom, in bold type, was a note from Silas Crow's lawyer. "These documents will be entered into evidence at the water rights hearing to establish the character of the household. A woman of such standing cannot be trusted to hold title or give testimony." Clara felt the porch railings bite into her back. They were not just attacking the land anymore. They were dismantling her soul. They were going to stand up in a courtroom and tell the world she was a whore, and the town, already primed by prejudice, would nod and say they knew it all along. She looked at Jonah, who was coming from the barn. He saw the paper. He saw her face. He walked up the steps and took the paper from her hand. He read it. His face did not change. It went still. That terrible, deadly stillness that happened before violence. "It is a lie," he said. "It is a half-truth." Clara whispered. "I worked at the hotel. I cleaned the rooms. Men, they tried things. Mr. Finch blamed me for it. He said I tempted them." "He is a liar," Jonah said. He crushed the paper in his fist. "Crow bought this lie. He paid a man in Ohio to write it." "It does not matter if he bought it," Clara said, her voice trembling. "The town will believe it. If we go to court, this is what they will hear. They will say you married a fallen woman. They will say your word is worth nothing because you share a bed with me." "I do not care what they say." "I do," Clara cried. "I care that I am the rock that drags you down. You could fight Crow alone. You could fight him on the land, but you cannot fight this. I am the weakness. Jonah, I am the reason you will lose." She turned and ran into the house. For 2 days, the silence in the house was suffocating. It was not the companionable silence of before. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a sick room. Clara moved like a ghost. She did the chores. She cooked, but she avoided Jonah's eyes. A dark certainty had taken root in her mind, a weed fed by years of being told she was a burden. She had been sold by her stepfather. She had been traded by her family. And now, she was the anchor drowning the only man who had ever treated her with gentleness. Survival had taught her one rule: run before you are thrown out. Leave before the pain becomes unbearable. On the third afternoon, the sky turned a milky white. The air grew heavy and still. A blizzard was coming. Jonah was out checking the herd. Clara went to the bedroom. She dragged her trunk from the corner. She opened it and began to pack. She put in the gray work dress. She put in her Bible. She put in the small bag of coins she had saved from the egg money. She would go to the depot. She would take the night train west, to California or Oregon, somewhere far enough away that the stain of her name would not touch Jonah Hale. He could claim abandonment. He could annul the marriage. He would be free to fight Crow without the weight of her reputation around his neck. She was folding her shawl when the door opened. She froze. Jonah stood in the doorway. He was covered in snow. The first flakes had started to fall. He looked at the trunk. He looked at the half-empty wardrobe. He looked at her. He did not yell. He did not storm into the room and demand to know what she was doing. He simply took off his hat. He walked over to the wall near the door and slid down it until he was sitting on the floor. His long legs stretched out before him. He rested his head against the plaster and closed his eyes. "I am leaving," Clara said. Her voice was thin. "It is the only way. Jonah, if I go, they cannot use me against you. You can say I deceived you. You can be the victim." Jonah did not open his eyes. "Is that what you think I want, to be a victim?" "I think you deserve to save your ranch," Clara said, "and you cannot save it with me here." Jonah let out a long breath. "I spent 10 years in this house alone," he said. 10 years. I woke up every morning and told myself that I was doing it for the land, that I was keeping the promise I made to my brother." He opened his eyes and looked at her. The gray light from the window fell across his face, highlighting the deep lines of fatigue. "But that was a lie," he said. "I wasn't doing it for the land. I was doing it because I believed I was poison. Clara, I watched my brother burn. I held him, and I could not pull him out. I decided then that anyone I loved would be destroyed. So I chose loneliness. I thought it was what I deserved. I thought it was noble." He looked at her trunk. "When you came, I tried to keep the wall up. I tried to treat you like a contract, but you kept working. You kept bleeding for this place, and you kept looking at me like I was a man, not a ghost. Jonah, if you leave," he said, his voice cracking, "you are not saving me. You are confirming the only thing that truly scares me. You are proving that I am not fit to be with people, that I am only fit for the silence." He leaned his head back against the wall again. "Do not go. Clara, the land is dirt. The water is mud. If I lose the ranch, I lose my history. But if you walk out that door, I lose my future." Clara stood there, the shawl in her hands. She looked at the man sitting on the floor, the strongest man she had ever known, reduced to absolute vulnerability. He wasn't asking her to stay for his laundry or his cooking. He was telling her that she was the only thing standing between him and the dark. She dropped the shawl into the trunk. She walked over to him and sat down on the floor. She pulled his heavy head onto her shoulder. "I will not go," she whispered. The storm hit an hour later. It was a white hurricane. The wind screamed like a banshee, shaking the sturdy timbers of the house until the plates rattled on the shelves. The temperature plummeted. They could not heat the bedroom. They dragged the mattress into the main room and laid it before the hearth. They fed the fire with oak logs until the heat pushed back the freezing draft leaking through the floorboards. They were trapped. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the firelight, the howling wind, and the two of them, lying there in the dark under a pile of quilts. The last barriers came down. They did not just touch, they talked. Clara told him everything. She told him about the hotel in Ohio, not the sanitized version, but the raw truth. The way the manager had cornered her in the linen closet, the way she had struck him with the candlestick, the way he had thrown her out on the street without her coat, screaming that she was a thief to cover his own shame. She told him about the years of walking with her head down, terrifyingly aware that her poverty made her prey. "I thought I was ruined," she whispered into Jonah's chest. "I thought that once a woman was looked at that way, she was spoiled." Jonah stroked her hair, his hand rhythmic and soothing. "You were never spoiled," he said. "You were hunted. There is a difference." Then he spoke of the fire. He told her the part he had never told anyone. "I was awake," he said, "the night the lightning struck. I was in the bunkhouse, and I was awake, reading a letter. If I had looked out the window, I might have seen the smoke sooner. I might have had 5 more minutes. I have carried those 5 minutes for 10 years. Every time I look at the bare ground behind the barn, I count them." Clara pressed her hand against his heart. "You cannot save people from lightning, Jonah. You can only love them while they are here." The confession drained the poison from the wound. The guilt he had carried, the belief that his negligence caused the death of his family, was met not with judgment, but with absolution. Their desire, when it rose again, was different than before. It wasn't the frantic, adrenaline-fueled hunger of the barn. It was slow. It was deep. It was a language of reassurance. Jonah touched her not to possess her, but to verify she was there. His hands moved over her scars, the burn on her arm from the stove, the barbed wire scratch on her hand, worshipping the evidence of her survival. Clara learned, in the safety of that storm-bound house, that she could ask. "Hold me tighter," she whispered. "Here?" Jonah asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes. There." She learned that her pleasure was not a theft. It was a gift he was desperate to give. She learned that Jonah needed to be wanted. He needed to know that his size and his strength and his scarred hands were not sources of fear for her, but sources of comfort. When the storm finally broke 2 days later, the world was buried in 3 feet of snow. The silence was absolute. But inside the house, the air was warm. They emerged from the storm not as 2 people who had survived a disaster, but as 2 people who had forged a fortress. The peace did not last. Crow was not a man to wait for the snow to melt. 3 days after the storm, Tommy Reyes did not return from checking the mail at the box on the main road. Jonah saddled the big bay horse and rode out, Clara following on her mare. They found Tommy a mile from the gate. He was crawling through the snow, dragging one leg. His face was a mask of blood. One eye was swollen shut. His coat was torn, and his ribs were broken. Jonah leaped from his horse before it had fully stopped. He gathered the boy up in his arms, his face twisting with a rage that was terrifying to behold. "Who?" Jonah demanded. "Crow's men," Tommy gasped, spitting blood into the snow. "3 of them, with clubs. They said to tell you the price just went down. They said next time, it won't be the hired help. It will be the wife." They got Tommy back to the bunkhouse. Clara set the brakes in his ribs and stitched the cut over his eye. She worked with steady hands, but inside, she was burning. This was not business. This was not a property dispute. This was a slaughter. Jonah stood by the window of the bunkhouse, watching the white hills. He was vibrating with the need for retaliation. He wanted to take his rifle and ride to the rolling sea and end it. "If you ride there," Clara said, wiping her hands on a rag, "Sheriff Laird will hang you for murder. That is what they want. Jonah, they want you to strike first." "I cannot sit here and wait for them to kill us," Jonah snarled. "We will not wait," Clara said, "but we will not fight them with guns. Not yet." She put on her heavy coat. "I'm going to see Mrs. Alden." Jonah turned. "The schoolteacher? Why?" "Because she writes everything down," Clara said. "She is the conscience of this valley, and she is the only person Crow cannot buy." Clara rode to the Alden homestead 7 miles away. The snow was deep, the going slow. Mrs. Alden was a severe woman in her 60s, the widow of a circuit preacher who ran the small schoolhouse with a ruler of iron. She listened to Clara's story in her parlor, pouring tea into china cups. She listened to the account of the blackmail, the lies about Ohio, the beating of Tommy Reyes. Men like Silas Crow believe they are gods because they own the dirt, Mrs. Alden said, setting her cup down. "But God sees everything, and I have been keeping a journal of this valley for 40 years. She went to a bookshelf and pulled down a heavy ledger. Crow's men threatened the Miller family in 85. They burned the Peterson barn in 88. I have the dates. I have the names of the men who saw the smoke. "Will you testify?" Clara asked. "I will," Mrs. Alden said. "And I will bring the women of the church. They may gossip, Clara, and they may be cruel, but they do not like it when boys are beaten on the road. Tommy Reyes is Mary Miller's nephew. She will not like hearing that Crow's men broke his ribs." While Clara gathered the community, Jonah went to war with the paper. He tore the house apart. He opened the false bottoms of drawers. He went through his father's old sea chest. He was looking for the original water filing. The one Laird claimed was missing. He didn't find the filing, but he found something else. In the bottom of the strongbox, tucked inside a ledger from 1890, was a receipt. It was signed by Sheriff Laird. It was for a consulting fee paid by the Rolling Sea Cattle Company. The date corresponded exactly with the foreclosure of the Ecstatic Ranch to the east, land that Crow had snapped up for pennies. "He is on the payroll," Jonah said, slamming the receipt onto the table. "He has been working for Crow for years. He seizes the land. Crow buys it, and Laird gets a cut. It proves corruption, Clara said, looking at the receipt. But it does not save the water. No, Jonah said. But this might. He held up a crumpled envelope. It was the rest of Etta's letter. He had found it stuck behind the drawer of the wardrobe, where Clara must have dropped it when she was packing. Clara took it. She read the second page, the one she had missed in her panic weeks ago. Clara, you must understand, the contract is a trap. Crow's lawyer wrote a clause into the marriage addendum. It says that any pre-existing debts of the wife can be levied against the husband's estate if they are married for less than 1 year. They know about father's debts. They know about the hotel. They plan to buy up those debts, then come to Jonah and say, pay us $5,000 for your wife's past, or give us the water rights. They need a bride with a past. Clara, that is why they wanted me, and when I ran, they sent you because you have a past too. They are banking on Jonah's honor. They know he will pay to protect his wife. He will sign away the creek to save you from prison. Clara dropped the letter. The room swayed. It wasn't just that she was unchosen. It wasn't just that she was a replacement. She was the weapon. She had been sent here, loaded and primed, to blow a hole in Jonah's life. Every kindness he had shown her, every moment of protection, played right into Crow's hands. They knew he would try to save her, and the price of saving her was the ranch. She sank into a chair. A dry, ragged sob tore from her throat. I was so stupid, she gasped. I thought I was fighting for a place. I thought I was earning my keep, but I was just the bait. She buried her face in her hands. All those years, she wept, obeying, being quiet, doing what I was told. I thought it made me good. I thought if I was just good enough, I would be safe. But it just made me easy to use. It was a grief that went deeper than the immediate danger. It was the grief of a lifetime of erasure. She had tried so hard to be the perfect, compliant woman, and that very compliance had been weaponized against the only person she loved. Jonah moved across the room. He did not touch her at first. He knelt in front of her chair, forcing her to look at him. Clara, he said, I am a curse. She wept. You should have sent me back the first day. Look at me, Jonah commanded. She raised her tear-stained face. You are not a curse, Jonah said. His voice was steady, calm, and utterly convicted. And you are not bait. Bait does not ride into a canyon to save a horse from a rattlesnake. Bait does not stare down a sheriff in a general store. Bait does not ride 7 miles in the snow to get a witness. He took her hands. His grip was iron. You think they used you because you are weak, he said. But they miscalculated. They brought you here, and you became the strongest thing on this land. You are not good. Clara, good is a word for dogs and children. He leaned closer, his eyes burning into hers. You are brave, you are smart, and you are real. You are the steel in the blade. Clara, I lived in a fog for 10 years until you walked onto that platform. I see you. I see all of you, the hotel, the fear, the fight, and I would not trade 1 inch of you for 1,000 acres of water. Clara looked at him. She saw the truth in his face. He wasn't trying to make her feel better. He was telling her the facts as he saw them. They want to use my debts to take your land, she whispered. Then let them try. Jonah said, they expect us to hide. They expect me to pay them quietly to keep your secrets hidden. They think I am ashamed of you. He stood up, pulling her with him. We are not going to hide. We are not going to pay. What are we going to do? Clara asked. We are going to file a suit, Jonah said. We are going to demand a formal hearing in the county court. We are going to put Mrs. Alden on the stand. We are going to put Tommy Reyes on the stand. And we are going to put you on the stand. Clara's breath hitched. Me? They will destroy me. They will try, Jonah said. But we will tell the truth. All of it. The blackmail. The contract. The corruption. We will drag their secrets into the light. He paused, his expression softening. It will be hard. The town will judge. People will talk. Let them talk, Clara said. A new strength was rising in her. cold and clear as the winter air. She was done with shame. She was done with hiding. "If we lose," Jonah said, "we lose the ranch. We leave with nothing but the clothes on our backs." "If we leave together," Clara said, "then we do not leave with nothing." Jonah nodded. He walked to the window and looked out at the snowy valley, then back at his wife. "Get the papers," he said. "We ride for the county seat at dawn." The county seat was a place of noise and sharp angles, a stark contrast to the rolling silence of the valley. The streets were choked with wagons, the air thick with the smell of coal smoke and unwashed bodies. Men in stiff black coats hurried between the brick buildings, clutching leather portfolios, their face set in expressions of self-importance. Jonah drove the wagon down the main thoroughfare, his eyes scanning the rooftops and the alleyways. He did not look like the town men. He wore his best coat, brushed clean of dust, but it sat uneasily on his broad shoulders. He looked like what he was, a creature of the high plains, trapped in a cage of masonry. Clara sat beside him. She wore her gray dress, the one she had mended a dozen times, but she had starched the collar until it stood stiff and white. She held her head high, though she could feel the eyes of the crowd on her. They were not just staring, they were dissecting. The story of the replacement bride and the contested water rights had traveled ahead of them, twisted and embellished in every saloon from here to the railhead. "Stay close to me," Jonah said as he helped her down in front of the courthouse. He did not grip her arm. He did not pull her. He simply stood near her, a solid, immovable presence at her shoulder. It was a stance of protection, but not possession. He was telling the world that he stood with her, not that he owned her. The courtroom was stifling. It smelled of stale tobacco, floor wax, and the sour sweat of nervous men. The gallery was packed. Clara saw faces from Cottonwood, the store clerk, Mrs. Miller, and near the back, Sheriff Laird, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and a smirk playing on his lips. When the judge entered, a hush fell over the room. He was a man with a face like a dried riverbed, weary and impatient. Silas Crow was not there. He had sent his lawyers, 3 men who looked like crows in their dark suits, arranging papers with predatory precision. The hearing began with the dry rustle of maps. The lead lawyer for the Rolling Sea, a man named Mr. Blackwood with a voice like oil poured on velvet, laid out the case. He spoke of survey lines, of shifting creek beds, of the progress of the West. He painted Jonah not as a landowner, but as an obstacle, an unstable recluse, the ghost of the valley, whose grasp on reality was as tenuous as his grasp on the land. Then he turned his eyes to Clara. "And let us consider the character of the household," Blackwood said, walking toward the witness box where Clara had been sworn in. "A man who lives in isolation, who brings a woman into his home, a woman with a history." He held up the affidavit from Ohio. "Mrs. Hale," Blackwood said, "is it true that you were dismissed from the Finch Hotel in Cincinnati for moral turpitude? Is it true that you were accused of soliciting guests for money?" The courtroom erupted in whispers. "Mrs." Miller gasped loudly. Jonah half rose from his seat, his knuckles white on the railing. But Clara caught his eye. "Sit," her eyes said. "Let me do this." Clara gripped the edge of the witness stand. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them to be still. She looked at the lawyer. Then she looked out at the sea of judging faces. She thought of Etta running in the night. She thought of the years she had spent hiding, apologizing for her own existence. "It is true that I was dismissed," Clara said. Her voice was quiet at first, trembling like a leaf. Then she took a breath, drawing in the memory of the storm, the strength of the mountains. "But I was not dismissed for soliciting. I was dismissed because the hotel owner tried to force himself on me in a linen closet, and I struck him with a candlestick to stop him." The whispers grew louder. "A convenient story," Blackwood sneered. "But you have no witnesses. And is it not true that your own family sent you here to pay a debt? That you are, in essence, a payment? A woman traded for a ledger balance?" "I was sent," Clara said, her voice ringing clear now, hitting the back walls. I was used. That is true. I was poor, and in this world, being poor and being a woman is treated as a crime. My stepfather traded me because he saw no value in me but my obedience. You see no value in me but my shame. She stood up straighter. But I am not ashamed. I survived. I worked. I bled for that land. If my husband is unstable because he offered shelter to a woman the world wanted to throw away, then he is the only sane man in this room. And if Silas Crow thinks he can take our water because he has more money, then he is not a pioneer. He is a thief in a silk vest. The gavel banged. The judge demanded order. But the air in the room had changed. Clara had not denied the poverty. She had owned it. She had refused to let it be a weapon. Mrs. Alden took the stand next. The severe schoolteacher opened her journal and read the dates of fires, the names of beaten men, the history of intimidation. Her voice was dry and factual, cutting through the lawyer's objections like a school ruler. Then Tommy Reyes, his ribs taped beneath his shirt, his face still bruised purple and yellow. He pointed a shaking finger at the back of the room. "That man," he said, pointing to one of Laird's deputies. He held the club. Finally, the county clerk, sweating through his collar, admitted under Jonah's questioning that the original water filing had been moved to a dead file box only 3 months ago. On the same day Sheriff Laird had visited the office. It was not a clean victory. The law was a tangled thing, slow and cumbersome, but when the judge banged his gavel to end the session, he did not rule for Crow. This court finds sufficient evidence of irregularity in the survey and the filing. The judge rasped. I am issuing a temporary injunction. The rolling sea is forbidden from diverting water or erecting fences on the disputed tract until a state surveyor can arrive in the spring. Sheriff Laird. This court will be forwarding the testimony regarding your office to the governor. It was a delay. It was a breath of air. They walked out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun. Clara felt lightheaded, drained of adrenaline. Mrs. Hale. Sheriff Laird was waiting at the bottom of the steps. He was smiling, but his eyes were flat and cold as a snake's. You talk a lot for a replacement, Laird said, stepping close to her. But talk is cheap. An injunction is just paper. Paper burns real easy. Accidents happen out there in the rocks. A horse stumbles. A woman gets lost in a blizzard. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. You watch your back. Clara, Ohio is a long way away, but a grave is right under your feet. A shadow fell over Laird. Jonah moved. He did not strike. He did not shout. He simply stepped into the space between Laird and Clara. He was taller than the sheriff, broader, and in that moment, he radiated a violence so pure and concentrated that Laird took a stumbling step back. Laird, Jonah said. The sheriff's hand twitched toward his gun. Do not, Jonah said softly. You are used to bullying boys and frightening women, but if you ever speak to my wife again, if I even see your shadow on my land, I will not bring you to a judge. He leaned down, his face inches from Laird's. I will bury you in a place where even the coyotes will not find you, and I will sleep soundly that night. Do you understand me? Laird paled. The bluster drained out of him. He looked at Jonah's eyes and saw the truth there. The fire that had burned 10 years ago was still burning, and it would consume him. You are threatening an officer of the law, Laird stammered. I am promising, Jonah said. He took Clara's arm. Come, Clara, we are going home. The drive back took 2 days. The relief of the victory began to fade as they crossed the valley floor. A sense of unease settled over Jonah. He kept watching the horizon, urging the horses to a faster pace. What is it? Clara asked. The wind, Jonah said. It smells wrong. They crested the final ridge at sunset. The ranch lay spread out below them in the gathering dusk. Oh God, Clara whispered. Smoke was rising, not from the chimney, but from the yard. The hay shed was gone. It was a skeleton of blackened timbers, still smoldering. The stack of winter feed, 600 bales that Jonah had counted and recounted, was a pile of gray ash. They raced down the hill, the wagon bouncing violently. Jonah pulled the team up in the yard and jumped down. The house, he shouted. The house still stood. The fire had been set in the shed in the barn. The barn door was scorched, but the damp wood from the snowstorm had kept it from catching fully. Jonah ran to the well. He cranked the bucket up, his movements frantic. He lifted it to his nose and recoiled, pouring the water onto the ground. "Coal oil," he choked out. "They dumped coal oil in the shaft." He looked at the dead chickens lying by the trough. They had drunk the water. Clara stood in the center of the yard. The smell of smoke was everywhere. It was the smell of loss. The winter feed was gone. The water was poisoned. The injunction was a piece of paper in the strongbox. But this was the reality of Silas Crow. He knew, Clara said dully. He knew the judge might pause him, so he decided to starve us out. Jonah stood by the ruined well. His shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked broken. "I cannot feed them," he whispered. "The cattle, without the hay, without the water." Clara walked over to him. She grabbed his arm. "We have the creek," she said. "The injunction says the water is ours. We will haul it. We will chop ice if we have to." "Clara, the hay is gone. We will cut boughs," she said. "We will drive them to the lower canyon where the grass is thin but reachable. We will not let them win. Jonah, look at me." She shook his arm until he looked at her. "They burn the shed because they are afraid," she said. "They are afraid because we fought back. If we give up now, the fire wins." The next week was a blur of brutal, physical agony. Grief was not a sentiment. It was labor. They worked from before dawn until long after dark. They hitched the team to the sled and hauled barrels of water from the creek, breaking the ice with axes each morning. The water froze on their clothes, stiffening the fabric until it cracked. They spent hours dragging pine boughs and scrub oak from the ridges to feed the hungry cattle, their hands raw and bleeding despite the gloves. They were covered in soot. The smell of the fire clung to their skin, their hair, their bed sheets. One night, they collapsed onto the rug in front of the fire. They were too tired to wash. Clara's face was streaked with charcoal. Jonah's hands were wrapped in rags where the blisters had burst. They ate cold biscuits and dried beef. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Clara looked at Jonah. He was staring into the flames, his eyes hollow. "I am sorry," he said. His voice was a rasp. "I promised you a shelter. I gave you a ruin." Clara set her biscuit down. She crawled across the rug until she was kneeling between his legs. She placed her hands on his chest. "I do not want a shelter," she said, fierce and low. "I want a life." Jonah looked at her. "This is not a life. This is survival. This is dirt and pain." "It is our dirt," Clara said. "It is our pain. Do you not see?" "Jonah, in Ohio, I had a room that was clean. I had food, but I was dead. I was a ghost walking through rooms that belonged to other people. Here, I am tired. I am cold, but I am alive." She leaned in, her forehead pressing against his. "I want to stay," she whispered. "Even if the house burns, even if we have to live in a tent, I want to be with you." Jonah's hands came up to frame her face. His thumbs traced the soot on her cheekbones. "I tried to talk myself out of you," he admitted. "Every day for months, I told myself it was just the contract, just honor. But when I saw that fire, my first thought was not for the hay. It was not for the cattle. It was terror that you might be inside." His eyes burned with a sudden, fierce moisture. "I do not want you as a replacement. Clara, I do not want you as a bargain. I choose you. If the whole world burns down tomorrow, I choose you today." He kissed her. It tasted of smoke and salt tears. It was desperate. It was the kiss of two people standing on the edge of a cliff, holding on to each other because gravity was trying to pull them down. They did not go to the bedroom. They stayed by the fire, shedding their stiff, soot-stained clothes. The intimacy was not gentle. It was urgent. It was a reclaiming of life in the face of death. They moved together with a feverish intensity, skin against skin, seeking the heat that the winter tried to steal. There was no shame, no hesitation. There was only the fierce, pounding rhythm of their hearts. the tang of sweat and smoke, and the absolute terrifying knowledge that tomorrow was not promised. They loved each other with the ferocity of soldiers before a battle, memorizing the feel of bone and muscle, grounding themselves in the only truth that mattered. The next morning, the community began to shift. It started small. A wagon arrived at mid-morning. It was Mr. Henderson, the man who ran the lumber yard. He looked uncomfortable. He did not look at Jonah. "Heard about the shed," Henderson muttered, spitting tobacco into the snow. "Got some cull lumber, warped boards. Mostly. Can't sell 'em. Thought you might make use of 'em for a windbreak." He unloaded the wood without waiting for a thank you and drove off. 2 days later, a basket appeared on the porch. It contained 3 jars of preserved peaches and a loaf of bread. There was no note, but the napkin was embroidered with a pattern Clara recognized from the clerk's wife, the woman who had traded vegetables for sewing. Not everyone was kind. When they rode into town for nails, the silence was still there. Some men spat on the ground when Jonah passed. The shame of the replacement bride testifying in court still rankled the traditionalists. They hated that she'd spoken. They hated that she had won. But the cracks in the wall of prejudice were there. The brutality of the poisoned well had gone too far. Even hard men drew a line at poisoning water. The final confrontation did not come from the law. It came from the man who thought he was above it. A week after the fire, a fine black carriage, drawn by 4 matching grays, turned off the main road and navigated the ruts of the ranch drive. It stopped in the yard, its polished lacquer gleaming incongruously against the charred ruins of the shed. Silas Crow stepped out. He was a man of 60, tall and silver-haired, wearing a coat with a fur collar. He looked like a king visiting a peasant's hovel. He carried a cane, though he walked with a predator's grace. Jonah was in the barn. Clara was on the porch, shaking out a rug. Crow walked to the foot of the steps. He took off his hat. "Mrs. Hale," he said. His voice was rich and deep, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. "Mr. Crow," Clara said. She did not put down the rug. She kept her hands busy to hide their trembling. "I must say," Crow said, looking around the yard, "you are resilient. Most women would have taken the train by now." "I am not most women," Clara said. "Clearly." Crow smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. "I am here to make you an offer. Clara, may I call you Clara? I feel we know each other, in a way." "You can call me Mrs. Hale," she said. "Very well. Mrs. Hale, you have won a small victory in court, an injunction. It is annoying, but it is temporary. Money eventually erodes the law, just as water erodes stone. And I have a great deal of water. And money." He stepped up onto the first step. "But I am a businessman. I dislike waste. This fighting, it destroys value. So here is my offer." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet. $5,000, he said. "In gold notes. It is a fortune. It is enough to go to San Francisco, to New York, to Europe. You could be a lady of means. Clara, you could wipe the slate clean. No more poverty. No more shame." Clara looked at the wallet. It was more money than she had ever seen. It was freedom. "And what do I have to do?" she asked. "Leave," Crow said simply. "Leave him. Leave the valley. Without you, Jonah will crumble. He is already broken. You are the only glue holding him together. If you leave, he will sell to me within the month. I get the water. You get a life." Clara looked at the man. She saw the absolute emptiness in his eyes. He thought everyone had a price because he had sold his own soul so long ago. "You are right," Clara said. "I am the glue." She stepped down so she was eye level with him. "But you are wrong about the price. You think I stayed because I had nowhere to go. You think I endured the fire and the cold because I was trapped." She leaned in close. "I stayed because I love him. And there is not enough gold in your bank to buy even 1 hour of what we have." Crow's smile vanished. His eyes turned to chips of ice. "Love," he scoffed. Love is a fairy tale for poor people to keep them from realizing how miserable they are. You are making a mistake, girl. A fatal one. Get off my land, Clara said. Crow looked at her for a long moment. Then he put the wallet away. Your land? He said softly. We shall see. He turned and walked back to his carriage. As he climbed in, he paused and looked back at the house. He looked at Jonah, who had emerged from the barn with a rifle in his hand. Crow did not look afraid. He looked resolved. He drove away. That night, there was no moon. The valley was a bowl of ink. Jonah and Clara sat in the kitchen. The rifle lay on the table between them. They did not speak. They knew that the offer had been the final courtesy. The rejection was the declaration of total war. He will not wait for the law, Jonah said. He cannot afford to. If we survive the winter, the state surveyor comes. He has to finish this now. How? Clara asked. Jonah stood up and blew out the lamp. Look. He went to the window. Clara joined him. Far to the south, along the ridge line of the rolling sea, lights were moving, not stars, lanterns, dozens of them. They were bobbing and weaving, moving down the slope like a swarm of fireflies. They were coming, not one or two men to light a fire. An army. They are coming to end it, Jonah said. He turned to Clara in the dark. He could not see her face, but he could feel her warmth. Get the cartridges, he said. Clara moved to the cupboard. She did not tremble. The time for fear was past. She was the replacement bride, the leftover woman, the unwanted debt. But tonight, she was the defender of this house. She placed the box of ammunition on the table. I am ready, she said. The lanterns bobbed in the darkness like the eyes of wolves. There were too many of them. From the kitchen window, Jonah counted 10, maybe 12 riders, spreading out in a loose crescent that cut off the road to town. They moved with the arrogance of men who owned the night. Inside the house, the air was cold and smelled of gun oil. Jonah moved with a grim economy, sliding the heavy oak bar across the front door. He blew out the last lamp, plunging the room into a gray gloom, illuminated only by the faint starlight coming through the shutters. Go to the cellar, Jonah said. He was checking the action on his Winchester, his thumb sliding over the steel. Clara stood by the table. She had not gone to the cellar. She had opened the box of cartridges and was lining them up in rows, brass gleaming dully in the dark. No, she said. Jonah stopped. He looked at her. Clara, this is not a legal dispute. They are here to burn us out. If they breach the door, you will need someone to load, Clara said. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she set a cartridge on the wood. I'm not going underground. Jonah, I spent my whole life hiding in small rooms while men decided my fate. I am not doing it tonight. Jonah looked at her, really looked at her, in the shadow. He saw the set of her jaw, the same stubborn angle he had seen when she milked the kicking cow, the same fierce light he had seen in the courtroom. He did not argue. He nodded once. Stay low, he said. Keep away from the windows. If I go down, you take the rifle and you go out the back. You run for the creek bed. Do not look back. You are not going down, Clara said. A voice boomed from the yard. It was amplified by the stillness of the valley. Jonah Hale! It was Silas Crow. He did not sound angry. He sounded like a man concluding a business transaction. Come out, Jonah. Let us finish this. I have the papers here, a simple signature, transferring the water rights and the deed to the lower pasture. Sign it, and my men ride away. You and the girl can leave with your lives. Jonah moved to the window. He cracked the shutter an inch. I have an injunction. Crow. A judge said you cannot touch this land. Laughter rippled through the line of riders. The judge is in the county seat. Crow called back. The sheriff is here, and out here. The law is what I say it is. You have 5 minutes. Jonah. After that, we start with the house, and fire does not care about injunctions. Jonah turned to Clara. He wants the signature. That buys us time. He will not burn the house while the papers are unsigned inside it. Time for what? Clara whispered. We are alone. Tommy is in the bunkhouse ruins. Jonah said. "He has a rifle, but he cannot fight 12 men. We need to split their attention." "The bell," Clara said. Jonah looked at her. The large iron dinner bell hung on a post near the barn. It was used to call hands in for meals, but in the valley, a bell ringing at night meant only one thing: fire, trouble. It was a signal that carried for miles in the thin air. "If I can ring it," Clara said, "the Hendersons might hear. They are only 2 miles downwind." "It is across the yard," Jonah said. "They will see you." "Not if you keep them looking at the porch," Clara said. She did not wait for his permission. She moved toward the back door, her boots silent on the floorboards. She grabbed her shawl, wrapping it tight to hide the pale shape of her face. "Clara," Jonah breathed. It was a prayer and a plea. "Give me 2 minutes," she said. "Then talk to him." She slipped out the back door into the biting cold. The wind had died, leaving the air frozen and crisp. She crouched low, using the bulk of the water trough as cover. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She heard Jonah's voice from the front of the house, loud and projecting. "Crow, if I sign, I want a guarantee of safe passage." "You have my word," Crow shouted back. Clara ran. She kept the charred remains of the hay shed between her and the riders. The smell of wet ash was overpowering, filling her nose, a stark reminder of what these men were capable of. She reached the corner of the barn. The bell post was 20 feet away, exposed in the open. She took a breath. She thought of Etta running away in the night. She thought of the years she had spent being the replacement, the second choice. "Not tonight," she thought. "Tonight I am the only choice." She sprinted. At the front of the house, Jonah stepped onto the porch. He held the rifle loosely in one hand, but his eyes were scanning the darkness, tracking the movement of the horses. He saw the glint of a barrel near the gate. "I want to see the papers," Jonah shouted. "Bring them here." "Walk out to the gate. Jonah!" Crow commanded. Then the sound shattered the night. Clang, clang, clang. The iron bell rang out, harsh and frantic. The sound ripped through the tension. "The bell!" one of the riders shouted. "Someone is by the barn!" "Stop them!" Crow roared. 3 riders wheeled their horses toward the barn. Jonah did not hesitate. He raised the Winchester and fired. The shot took the hat off the lead rider. The horse reared, screaming. Chaos erupted. The night dissolved into flashes of muzzle fire and the thunder of hooves. Jonah jacked the lever, firing again and again, trying to build a wall of lead between the riders and his wife. Bullets chewed into the porch railing, sending splinters flying into his face. He felt a hammer blow to his left shoulder, a sudden, numbing impact that spun him around. He stumbled, dropping to one knee. He gritted his teeth, shifting the rifle to his right hand. He kept shooting. By the barn, Clara had pulled the rope until her hands burned, but as the riders closed in, she dropped it and scrambled for the ladder to the hayloft. A bullet slapped into the wood, inches from her head. She threw herself into the loft, rolling into the dusty darkness just as the men reached the door. She crawled to the loading window. She had the heavy Colt revolver Jonah had given her tucked in her waistband. She pulled it out. Her hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped it. "Steady," she told herself. "Steady." Below her, in the yard, the fight was turning. Jonah was pinned down on the porch. Crow was shouting orders. "Burn it!" Crow screamed. "Burn the barn! Flush her out!" A man dismounted, carrying a torch. He ran toward the barn door. Clara rested the barrel of the Colt on the sill of the loft window. She looked down the sights, just as Jonah had taught her. "Squeeze, do not pull." She fired. The man with the torch yelled and dropped it in the snow, clutching his leg. "She is armed!" he screamed. Suddenly, a new sound joined the fray. From the darkness of the bunkhouse ruins, a rifle cracked, slow, precise shots. Tommy Reyes, he was hurt, but he was shooting. One of Crow's men grabbed his arm, his horse spinning. "Crow!" Clara screamed from the loft. Her voice was high and clear, cutting through the gunfire. "The neighbors are coming! The Hendersons are coming!" "Do you want witnesses to a murder?" Silas Crow rode his horse closer to the barn. heedless of the danger. He looked up at the loft window. His face was twisted in a rictus of hate. "You worthless little stray," Crow shouted. "You think you matter. You are a placeholder. You are a line in a ledger that I can erase. I will burn this barn with you in it, and tomorrow no one will even remember your name." Clara stood up. She stepped into the frame of the window. Silhouetted against the starlight, she made herself a target, but she also made herself a monument. "I am not a placeholder," she shouted back. "I am the wife of Jonah Hale. I am the woman who saved this land while you tried to steal it. I am the foundation, Silas Crow, and you cannot burn stone." She fired again, the shot kicking up snow near his horse's hooves. Crow raised his own pistol, aiming at her exposed form. But before he could pull the trigger, a thunder of hooves came from the main road. Not one horse, 6. "Sheriff!" a voice bellowed. It was not Laird. It was the deputy from the county seat, riding alongside Mr. Henderson and 3 other men from the valley. "Drop the weapons!" the deputy shouted, leveling a shotgun. Crow froze. He looked at the arriving men. He looked at the burning torch sizzling out in the snow. He looked at Jonah, who was standing on the porch, blood soaking his coat. Rifle still raised. The balance had shifted. In the dark, with only his paid men, Crow was a king, but under the eyes of witnesses, respectable men, men who voted, men who talked, he was a criminal. "This is a misunderstanding," Crow said, lowering his gun. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. "We were serving papers." "With torches?" Henderson shouted. "Get off this land, Crow, before we decide to hang a horse thief." Sheriff Laird, who had been hanging back near the gate, turned his horse and bolted into the dark. His power had evaporated the moment the county deputy arrived. Crow looked at Clara one last time. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture of mockery that failed to hide his defeat. "The winter is long, Mrs. Hale," he said. "And I have a warm coat," Clara answered. Crow wheeled his horse and signaled his men. They rode out, a sullen, defeated stream of shadows, leaving the ranch battered but unbowed. When the last hoofbeat faded, the silence that fell was heavy and aching. Clara climbed down from the loft. Her legs felt like water. She stumbled across the yard to the porch. Jonah was sitting on the steps. He was pressing a hand to his shoulder. Blood was seeping between his fingers, black in the starlight. "Jonah!" Clara dropped to her knees beside him. "I am fine," he grunted. His face was gray, slick with sweat. "Just a scratch. Through the meat." "You are not fine." "Did they hurt you?" he asked. He reached out with his good hand, gripping her arm, his eyes searching her face with a desperate intensity. "No," she said. "I am whole." "You rang the bell," he whispered. "You ran right through the fire." "We have to get you inside," Clara said. "With the help of Mr. Henderson." They got Jonah into the kitchen. They laid him on the table. Clara cut away his coat and shirt. The wound was ugly. A furrow plowed through the muscle of his upper shoulder, but it had missed the bone and the lung. She heated water. She found the whiskey. She threaded a needle. "This will hurt," she said. "I know," Jonah said. She cleaned the wound. She washed away the blood and the grime, her hand steady now that there was work to do. It was the same way he had cleaned her hand that first week, when she had cut it on the wire. The circle was closing. "I am sorry," Jonah said, his voice thick with pain and exhaustion. Clara paused, the needle in her hand. "For what?" "For bringing this to your door, for making you a target. You should have been safe. A husband is supposed to keep his wife safe." Clara looked at him. She saw the guilt that still ate at him, the old belief that he was dangerous to the people he loved. "Jonah," she said softly, "I almost left. That day before the blizzard, I almost got on the train." Jonah looked at her. "I know." "No, you do not know why," she said. "I did not want to leave because I was afraid of the danger. I wanted to leave because I did not think I was worth saving. I thought I was just debris, something to be used and discarded." She touched his cheek. "Tonight, when I stood in that loft, I did not feel like debris. I felt like I belonged here. You did not make me a target. Jonah, you made me a partner, and I would rather be shot at by your side than be safe and alone anywhere else." Jonah closed his eyes. A tear leaked out, cutting a clean track through the soot on his face. He reached up and covered her hand with his own. "Sew it up," he said. "We have work to do in the morning." Spring came to the valley not with a whisper, but with a roar. The snowmelt came rushing down from the high peaks, filling the dry creek beds with brown, churning water. The sound of running water was the sweetest music Clara had ever heard. The ranch was a hive of activity. The state surveyor had come and gone, confirming the old lines. The injunction was made permanent. Silas Crow, facing multiple lawsuits and a grand jury investigation in the capital, had retreated to his holdings in Denver. Sheriff Laird had been removed from office and had vanished, likely chasing easier prey in the territories. Jonah and Clara stood by the corral, watching the new calves run in the mud. The air smelled of wet earth and sagebrush. Jonah held a piece of paper in his hand. It was not a legal document. It was a page torn from the family Bible. "The circuit preacher is coming through next week," Jonah said, "to baptize the Miller baby." "Yes," Clara said. Jonah looked at the paper. "I wrote something down. I am not good with speeches, but I wanted to ask you something." He turned to face her. He looked different than the man she had met at the depot. The shadows were gone from his eyes. He stood straighter, though his shoulders still stiffened when the weather turned cold. "The first time we married," Jonah said, "it was a contract. It was a lie written by other men. I do not want a lie. Clara, I want to marry you, properly, not as a replacement for Etta, not as a way to hold the land." He held out his hand. "I want to marry you because you are the only person who ever saw me. I want to be your husband because you are the bravest woman I have ever known. I want to choose you, Clara Wren, every day, until the fire takes me." Clara looked at him. Her heart felt too big for her chest. "I am not Clara Wren anymore," she said. She reached into her pocket. She pulled out the crumpled letter from Etta, the letter she had kept as a reminder of her flight, of her shame. She tore it in half, then she tore it again. She let the pieces fall into the mud, where the hooves of the calves would trample them into the earth. "I am Clara Hale," she said, "and I choose you, Jonah. Not because I have to, because I want to." They married the following Tuesday, standing on their own porch, Mrs. Alden stood witness. Tommy Reyes, grinning through a healing jaw, held the ring. It was a simple band of gold, bought with the money from the first steer sales of the spring. When Clara signed the register, she did not hesitate. She wrote her name in a bold, sloping hand. Clara Hale. It was not a substitution. It was a declaration. The valley did not change overnight. There were still women who crossed the street when Clara walked by, whispering about her past. There were still men who resented Jonah's victory, but Clara found she did not care. She started a small school in the front room of the ranch house on Saturdays, teaching the children of the ranch hands and the poorer homesteaders how to read and cipher. She taught them that their worth was not determined by their boots or their father's debts. One afternoon, in late May, Mrs. Miller stopped her buggy on the road. She looked at Clara, who was weeding the garden, a garden that was finally green and thriving. "Mrs. Hale," Mrs. Miller said stiffly. "Mrs. Miller," Clara replied, shading her eyes. "My sister in Ohio. She wrote to me. She said that hotel owner, Mr. Finch, he was arrested for hurting a girl." Clara stood still. "I am sorry for the girl." "Mrs. Miller nodded. She looked at her gloves. "She said he was a liar. I thought you should know." She clicked to her horse and drove on. It was not an apology, but it was a truce. The sun was setting, painting the vast sky in streaks of violet and gold. The wind had dropped to a gentle breeze, rustling the new leaves on the cottonwood trees. Jonah sat on the porch step, whittling a piece of cedar. Clara sat in the rocking chair behind him, her mending in her lap. They did not need to speak. The silence between them was no longer a wall, it was a bridge. It was a comfortable, living thing. Jonah stopped whittling. He looked out at the land. The creek was running silver in the twilight. The cattle were grazing on the hillside, their coats thick and healthy. "We made it," he said softly. Clara put down her sewing. She walked over and sat on the step beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We did," she said. Jonah turned his head and kissed her hair. "Are you happy, Clara? Is it enough? The dust? The wind?" Clara looked at the horizon. She thought of the luxury she could have had with Crow's money. She thought of the safety of a city. Then she looked at Jonah's hand, resting on his knee, the hand that had pulled her from the mud, the hand that had defended her, the hand that held her in the dark. "It is not enough," she said. Jonah tensed. Clara smiled and took his hand, pressing it against her heart. "It is everything," she said. "It is the fire and the shelter, and it is ours." Jonah smiled, the true, unguarded smile that she had earned. He put his arm around her, pulling her close as the sun dipped below the mountains, leaving them wrapped in the twilight. Two figures etched against the vastness of the west, no longer alone and no longer afraid of the dark. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the dust and the snow, finding love in the hard places of the American West. I hope Clara and Jonah's story reminded you that worth is something we claim for ourselves, not something the world gives us. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. I am always amazed to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to From Wild West so you do not miss the next adventure. Share your thoughts in English in the comments. I read every one. Until next time, keep your fences strong and your heart open.